In Yu-Gi-Oh, there are some cards that require you to toss a coin or roll a dice in order to determine their effects. And sometimes they're not really worth that gamble, or can straight up lose you the game if you lose that gamble, which is basically what this list will be going over. Cards with really bad downsides to the gamble effects, or cards that just aren't worth the gamble effect. And at number 10, we have the best card on this list, and that is the Time Wizard. You see, the Time Wizard has an effect where you can call one coin, heads or tails, and if you call it correctly, you get to destroy all of your opponent's monsters, which is a great effect. But if you call it incorrectly, not only do you destroy all of your monsters instead, but you also take life point damage equal to half the attack of the total attack of all of your monsters destroyed by its effect. So it hurts you even more if you call it wrong than it would hurt your opponent if you got it right, which is why the best way to use this card is when it's basically the only card on your side of the field. Now, despite its really bad negative effect and the fact that it has terrible stats, so you're really leaving yourself open if you decide to use this card in the first place, is that there are cards that exist which do make its effect a little bit more bearable, with things like Second Coin Toss and Lucky Chance. Second Coin Toss allows you to try again if you get Time Wizard's effect wrong, which increases your chances of calling it correctly, by such a degree that in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, a gamble deck was actually viable because Second Coin Toss also existed in the earliest portion of that game, alongside cards like Time Wizard and Twin Barrel Dragon. And if you do call Time Wizard's effect correctly, Lucky Chance can allow you to draw a card off of that, which is pretty good too. It's definitely not the best thing in the world, as even in Duel Links, when people were actually playing Time Wizard, no one was really playing more than one Time Wizard in that gamble deck, and half the gamble decks didn't play Time Wizard at all, because its bad effect was actually kind of bad. But hey, Time Wizard is also one of the most iconic gamble cards in the game, and it's definitely better than a lot of the other cards on this list. And at number 9, we have Jirai Gumo. This is one of those high attack level 4 monsters with a negative effect, and its negative effect is a coin toss, where when this card declares an attack, you must toss a coin and call heads or tails. And if you call it correctly, then this card does its attack like normal. But if you call it incorrectly, you lose half your life points. Now, when this card first came out, 2200 attack on a level 4 monster was one of the highest in the game. And even today, that is enough to beat over basically all other level 4 monsters that are commonly played. But losing half your life points in order to attack is a pretty hefty downside, but it's also not the worst thing in the world, as that's not going to lose you the game. And some of the best cards in the game require you to pay half your life points, like Solemn Judgment. Except that card is really good, and Jirai Gumo is not even close. Which is why this card makes this list, for just being a level 4 beater with a negative effect, which isn't a really good card in today's meta, and honestly wasn't that great when it first came out either. And at number 8, we have Level Conversion Lab. Now, this card allows you to select one monster in your hand, and then roll a dice. If the result is 2 through 6, the level of the monster becomes equal to that dice roll. But if the result is 1, then you instead send that monster to the graveyard. Now, here's the thing. If this card only had the effect that changed the level of the monster in your hand from 1 through 6, it would be alright. The fact that it has the potential to discard the card with a 1 result kind of makes this card a little bit bad. Because the best use of this card is to use it on a high level monster in your hand so you can make it level 4 or lower. That way you can normal summon it from your hand without tributes. So if you roll a 5 or 6, that's already kind of a bad effect, because that means you'll still need to tribute 1 card in order to bring it out. So making 1 a bad result as well basically turns this card into a coin flip, where only 50% of the results will give you the desired effect, with at least a 1/6 of a chance of it just being a detrimental effect to you. And to add to the fact that the card is a trap card, so even if you did want to use this card to convert a high level monster into a level 4 or lower one, you'd have to set the card first, and then wait for your next turn in order to even use it, making the card even worse than it already is. And I should mention, I used to actually run this card in my main deck back in the day, because I didn't know any better, and I thought its effect was really good, so I can't give it too low of a spot on this list. And at number 7, we have Goddess of Whim. This card only has 950 attack points, which is really low, But it also has the effect where you can toss a coin and call heads or tails. And if you call it correctly, you get to double this card's attack until the end of the turn. But if you call it wrong, this card's attack will be cut in half instead. So, with its baseline stats, its attack will go up to 1900, which, hey, that's not half bad for a level 3 monster. Especially in the time this card came out, where a 1900 attack beat sticks were viable options. But then if you get it wrong, this card's attack will go down to 475, and it's already pretty bad starting off at 950. But here's the thing with this card, its effect itself doesn't double its original attack, it doubles whatever its current attack is. So if you use its effect after equipping it with a card like Psychic Blade, and give it 2000 extra attack, it will double that extra 2000 attack, and its attack will go up to 5900. So this card does have the potential to go to very high attack power values if you equip it with enough attack power increasing cards. Now that doesn't make it good, but it is a fun little gimmick, and I have absolutely built decks around this card in the past. But I'm the first person to say that my gimmick decks were never very good, but they were pretty fun to play with, especially when you got lucky. And at number 6, we have Elemental Hero Chaos Neos. This is a contact fusion monster, which requires 3 monsters for its fusion materials. It gets returned to your extra deck during the end phase, and its effect is for some reason a gamble effect, with the potential for a negative effect. So during your main phase, you can toss a coin 3 times, and then you gain effects depending on the number of heads. Where if you get 3 heads, you get to destroy all of your opponent's monsters. 2 heads, you get to negate the effects of all of your opponent's monsters until the end of the turn, and if you only get 1 heads, you return all monsters you control back to the hand, which is a really bad effect, especially since this card is not easy to bring out. So this card is kind of a wonder, as no one would really have batted an eye at it if it didn't have a negative effect associated to its gamble, because its first 2 effects are something worthy of its summoning requirements. But back in the day, when this card came out, the Neos archetype was kind of infamous for being kind of bad. This card really fit well with them, and it wasn't until their new wave of releases that the Neos archetype actually got really good support. Even with them making this card easier to bring out, it's still not really worth bringing out, because that negative effect is kind of bad. And it's not really worth bringing out for its beat stick status either. And at number 5, we have Prepare to Strike Back. This was a continuous trap card designed to work with cards like Goblin Attack Force, cards which have easy summoning requirements and high attack, but go to defense position after attacking. Because basically what this card does is if your opponent tries to attack one of your face-up defense position monsters, you get to toss a coin and call it. And if you call it correctly, your monster is changed to attack position. And since most of those monsters had 0 defense, this was a pretty good effect to have in order to put them into attack position so they wouldn't get destroyed by battle. Although it also has a negative effect where, if you call it wrong, not only does your monster not get swapped to attack mode, but your opponent's monster gains piercing damage, where you'll take life point damage basically equal to your opponent's monster's attack, while also having your monster destroyed. Now here's the thing about this card. The kind of deck in which it was made for isn't very good, and already has better options, like final attack orders or skill drain, so it didn't really need to have a gamble effect. It definitely did not need to have that negative effect, because even if the effect of the card was just to swap the monster to attack position without having to call a coin, it would still be a mediocre card that probably wouldn't see play. The fact that it has a gambling condition on top of this effect just made sure of it. And at number 4, we have Sand Gambler. Now, this card has an effect where you can toss 3 coins, and if all 3 are heads, then you get to destroy all of your opponent's monsters. But if all 3 are tails, you instead destroy all of your monsters. So basically, it's like a worse Time Wizard, as you have to get 3 heads, which is much harder than getting 1 from 1 coin toss, but at least it's hard to get its negative effect as well, as it is harder to get 3 tails. And this card even has less attack than Time Wizard, which just kind of makes this card unplayable. If they had given this card a normal stat line with this effect, it probably wouldn't be half bad. But the fact that they give it absolutely terrible stats on top of a terrible effect makes this card kind of bad, which is why they did release a better version of this card called the Gambler of Legend later on in the game's history, where it does have more attack in the form of the exact same attack as Time Wizard, which was also really weak, but its effect is a little bit better, as you still toss 3 coins, except you have more chances of getting a positive effect, where if you get 3 heads, you still get to destroy all of your opponent's monsters. If you get 2 heads, you get to discard a card from your opponent's hand, which, hey, it's pretty good. But then if you get 1 heads, you destroy 1 card you control, and then it has the negative effect of discarding your entire hand if you get all tails. Gambler of Legend isn't very good either, but it's at least mediocre enough to not make this list. Mainly because I was already putting Sand Gambler on this list, and these 2 cards are very similar to each other, and I kind of like to have some diversity when I put things on these lists. And at number 3, we have Lucky Punch. This is a continuous effect where, if your opponent declares an attack, you can toss a coin 3 times, and if all 3 are heads, you get to draw 3 cards. But if all 3 are tails, you must destroy this card and then take 6,000 points of damage. Now, drawing 3 cards is a really good effect. That heads effect is pretty nice. Losing 6,000 life points, though, is an enormous amount of life points to lose, and can quite easily lose you the game, especially since your opponent can destroy this card with other card effects in order to make sure you lose at 6,000 life points. Because it doesn't matter how this card on the field is destroyed, just as long as it is destroyed, you lose 6,000 life points. Although its negative effect won't absolutely lose you the game on its own, and its positive effect is really good. So, if anything, this card does really fit the whole gambling theme of having high highs and lower lows without absolutely losing you the game right off the bat. This card is mainly at a high spot on this list for how easy it is for your opponent to destroy it in order to make sure you lose at 6,000 life points, regardless if you lose at its gamble or not. And at number 2, we have Arcana Force 7, the Chariot. Now, pretty much all of the Arcana Force monsters have a coin toss effect in order to determine what kind of effect they will have on the field. Usually, the Tails effect is bad, and the Heads effect is good. And the Tails effect on this card makes you go -2, as your opponent will gain control of this card if you get the Tails effect, which is a really bad negative effect. Although I will mention, the Arcana Force archetype does have a whole bunch of support cards that allow you to circumvent the negative effects these cards sometimes give themselves, or to choose which effect they're going to have on the field. But some of those don't work with this card because it immediately gives control of itself to your opponent, and you kind of need to control this card in order to change its effect with one of those cards. And also, all of the Arcana Force cards are kind of bad. This one just kind of has one of the worst negative effects out of the group of cards that aren't very good in the first place. I will say though, its Heads effect is not half bad, as you get to special summon a monster which is destroyed by battle with this card onto your side of the field. Though the Arcana Force archetype doesn't really help him with this first effect very much, and there are other cards in the game that can do that, but better. And at number 1, we have the trap card called Gamble. Now, this card requires you to have 2 or less cards in your hand, and your opponent to have 6 or more cards in their hand. And then you get to use the Gamble effect, where you toss a coin and call heads or tails. And if you call it right, you get to draw cards so you have 5 in your hand. So, if you have no cards in your hand and use its effect, you get to draw 5 cards, which is really good. Although if you fail the coin toss, you skip your next turn. Now, skipping your turn in Yu-Gi-Oh! Can easily lose you the duel. So, the effect is basically draw 5 cards or lose the duel. Which, hey, I guess that really lives up to the gamble in its name. Because drawing 5 cards could absolutely help out pretty much any deck, but they just had to make this card a trap card and also give it a convoluted activation requirement on top of the gamble effect, even if you can use second coin toss with this card, which just makes it really unplayable. Like, the gamble effect might actually be somewhat playable if this was a spell card, meaning you could use it during your turn as soon as you drew it, and if it didn't have the hand size requirements for both players. Then this card would be a true gamble card of either drawing those 5 cards or losing the game. And I think they gave it those extra requirements to make sure no one would play this card, and I think this card is a good poster boy for the number 1 spot on this list. Alright, and that's the end of the video. If you think I missed any other worse gamble cards than the ones that appeared in this video, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.